BVI, baby. British Virgin Islands, this one's for us. Put your hands up.
BVI, and BVI.
Hands, sing BVI. Wave them to the sky. Rock from side to side. Represent the Virgin Islands. Hands, sing BVI.
I am your host, Shayna M. Smith, welcoming you to the Vigilate Dialogues. Our goal, as always, is to speak about current affairs and good governance. We like to also focus on solutions that improve our quality of life as we build a country that our children and our grandchildren will be proud to call home. You can also listen to us on www.cbnvirginislands.com by clicking on the FM 90.9 stream. Hey, on this program, one of my many hats. Today, I am Shayna Taxpayer. And today with me, I have a colleague of mine, Miss Bernadine Louis, Director of HLSCC VI Studies Institute, where we're going to talk along the lines of, again, we've had kicked off a My Virgin Islands Story project, talking about from whence we came so that we know where we're going. And if you still haven't seen that kickoff panel discussion, check it out on the Vigilate Dialogues Facebook page. It was earlier last month, and you can see what it is was discussed. Very enlightening conversation. All right, and we're going to announce our next event coming up shortly. So I'm excited about that as well, and that's going to happen. All right, so today we're going to be talking about my favorite subject, or one of them anyhow, politics. We are going to talk about the Virgin Islands political history and heritage. And, you know, I think, you know, we got one of subject matter experts. We're going to actually try to have someone else along with us to, you know, continue to unpack this conversation. Ms. Louis, thanks for being here. I think you've been on the dialogues before.
Well, first of all, thank you, Shayna. It's really a pleasure to be here. And yes, a couple of years back when you started, I have been on the show, yes.
Yeah, I was trying to remember.
Yes.
All right, well, at that time, I believe you were in a different capacity. So
yes,
tell us, what is the Virgin Islands Studies Institute?
Okay, yes, the Virgin Islands Studies Institute, it is unit of the Lavity Stoutt Community College, and the mandate includes, doing research and providing information to the community, to the students and the faculty first and foremost, but also to the community on the history and the culture of the Virgin Islands, and also contemporary issues. So the issue that we are looking at this afternoon. So that's our mandate. Mm-hmm. We have quite a bit of information, and where we don't have information, because, Shayna, we tend to, in these islands, talk a lot. Mm-hmm. And we don't a lot of times, we don't a lot of times tend to document things. So sometimes persons would turn up and they're doing research, or they're doing a publication, or, just out of interest, and they want information on a particular topic, and it's not there because it's in somebody's head, it was discussed orally, and there's no document or documentation of that particular topic. So one of the things we will be doing at the Institute is to, do some research ourselves and then try to fill in these gaps where there's a paucity of information,
Okay.
So,
all right. You have your work cut out for you.
Yes, we do. It's
quite a bit. Mm-hmm. All right. So what are some of the activities or events that the Institute does?
Well, like I just said, we offer a place to come and find information on anything Virgin Islands that persons are doing. We also do oral histories. Again, a lot of the older folks are passing on, and they're going with the knowledge, and so we are trying to capture that information from those persons. For instance, like the educators, we are trying to document all the educators over the years. We are trying to also do the legislators, the politicians, and we have actually started a project on documentaries of chief ministers specifically. Okay. I was involved or instrumental in doing the one on H.L. Stout, the late H.L. Stout. And our next project on that is to do the late Honorable Willard Wheatley.
Okay.
So that one we'll be working on and hopefully get it completed in the spring, which is January to June 2021 semester.
Okay.
And we plan to do all of them, Romney, Smith,
Okay.
all the chief ministers that have been, O'Neill,
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Okay. All right. Well, as it relates to a political journey, right? I always been sharing on the show about how my experience in taking the Virgin Islands study course up at Lavity College, and
Right.
how amazed I was and blown away that there was so much I didn't know. As much as I thought I knew, there was so much more that I didn't know, because I joke about it, but it's really serious. Whereas, like, when you did social studies, it was like, we had Columbus, we had the Amerindians, then there was slavery, and then we were emancipated. And then it's like, okay, remember this person, they're the deputy governor, right? So there was nothing in between emancipation and modern day. And, it's like there's so much that went on in there in terms of our socioeconomic development, how we arrived at the place that we are right now, and I think it's so important for whether you're a Virgin Islander, you're a resident or a visitor, that you know the Virgin Islands story. So, I'm really excited to hear about the Institute and the work that you have cut out for it. So for my research paper for my class, of course, I did it on politics. And that's what we're going to talk about today. To kind of fill in the blanks, because there were some really interesting things as it relates to our development. And, at the start of the paper, the premise of the paper was to talk about how the link between our political advancement and our actual socioeconomic development of the country, because, we have a very dynamic political history over several years. And, again, we weren't taught it in our education system. So, as always, I advocate, if you have time, enroll in that class. I'm still going to lobby for it to become a requirement at the college to make sure everybody takes that class, because it's very important for us to have that indoctrination as far as our history and heritage and our origins and understanding all of it, right? Yeah. All right, so let's start off in the 1700s. Right? That's where I kind of picked up the paper on. What was happening in the Virgin Islands around those times?
Yes. Well, I agree with you, Shana, before I even answer the question, because it's indeed, this Virgin Islands story is indeed an interesting and encouraging story when we look at from where we came to the point where we are now trying to go and trying to determine that for ourselves, as we call it, self-determination, self-representation. But for us to understand and appreciate the story, we need to really start from the beginning to see where we came from and, and what is happening and so on, and where we would like to go with that. And, as I imagine in a later show that we'll look at the actual constitutions and so on, as we're not necessarily looking at that today, and the benefits that we have derived from these documents with updating of each constitution of the Virgin Islands, and what are really the benefits from one to the other. But in the 1700s, our history and our story started out very much like the other Caribbean islands, where, we were, and we don't like to use the term discovered. Christopher Columbus happened upon these islands. He visited.
He showed up.
Right. And the islands were there, and he named them and so on. But we had the Amerindians here, and evidence digs, as we call them, archaeological digs that have occurred with Dr. Peter Druitt and others from the more developed countries have showed that we have had the Arawaks, we have had what we call the Siboney, the Taino, and then the Caribs. And so when he came along, they had this battle with the Caribs at St. Croix, because at that time, it was one set of Virgin Islands, and then, of course, they divided up into the ones that remained British, which is the Virgin Islands, and then you had the Danish West Indies, and they became the United States Virgin Islands. So we always at that time, we had a population that was transient. Those folks were here. You're talking about Amerindians, and then you had the wilder side, the pirates and those, and they used the islands for, smuggling and whatever their business at the time seems to have been, smuggling or whatever, fishing, and just being there when the ships passed from the European countries, they capture them and stuff like that to get the booty, as we call it. But it was not until the mid-17th century, which is the 1600s, that there was a more permanent settlement in the Dutch. The Dutch settlement was here, and then they were boosted out by the British in 1672.
Okay.
And since then, we have been under the British sovereignty. At the time, from all the research that was done and the books that currently exist, Pickering and Harragon and Valac and all of those, it will tell you that these islands were not very attractive in terms of being suitable for industry at the time, for agriculture and so on. We talked about scraggly hills and mountains and barren soil and all of that, so they were not very attractive. And in order for this colony to take off, the British at the time was sending out, giving land grants and so on to Europeans, to persons, and they came into the Caribbean and they tried to settle the islands. But you had places like Barbados and St. Kitts and those islands that was settled like since 1625, 1628.
Okay.
And we didn't get on the bandwagon until about 1672.
Okay.
And there was a particular set that came in from, I think it was Sir William Stapleton brought them in from Anguilla. And they came here and they settled here and they brought their enslaved persons to till the soil. They settled mainly in Virgin Gorda, Beef Island area.
Okay.
And there's actually a list of the first census, 17 census.
Okay.
That show you the names of these persons that settled here in Virgin Gorda and Beef Island, because even at that time, the capital was called Penistone, and then it became Spanish Town. And a lot of those names still are in existence today, right? So that's the history of how some of the names got here. It was very comprehensive in that it showed where the settlers came from originally. A lot of them were Irish.
This is in the census information? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of them were Irish or from Wales, Scotland. There were a couple of French, like the Creaky, that came down from, I think, the French. And they showed you whether they had a wife or not, and how many children they had, and how many enslaved persons they had. So it's quite an interesting document. We have a copy of that if anybody wants to look at it. And so at that time you had, so these persons finally settled, and they didn't really have a government structure per se. And according to my notes, they finally requested from the governor of the Leeward Islands a legislature, but that didn't actually happen until 1774, I think, when they got their first legislature.
So you just said that the governor of the Leeward Islands Federation. I think let's just talk a little bit about that, because people may have heard of it, but exactly what was the Leeward Islands Federation and how were we related to it?
Okay. I became really aware of our past in terms of the political development when I started the research process for a magazine which was supposed to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the ministerial system, right, of government. This was supposed to have been in 2017, and it was never published because of the hurricane. Okay. But I have all the information there. Now, at that time, when they start to at least try to put an organized structure together, because they had problems. You have persons living in a community, no law, no order.
Everybody is alone to
everybody's alone to themselves. So they
knows happening now. That's what you're telling me.
So in 1671 thereabout, but again, because the the sovereignty at the time, the British, they didn't see much value in having another, especially a little colony. They didn't really contribute anything much, like, Barbados and the bigger islands and
who
so
were big in sugarcane production and cotton.
Exactly, because we started out with cotton and tobacco and indigo and things like that. And so they decided to group what you call the Leeward Islands together, and it was this small group with Antigua and Barbuda, Montserrat, Anguilla, the Virgin Islands, St. Kitts and Nevis, right. And so they lumped them together under a federation of the Leeward Islands.
Okay.
But they were governed they were called presidencies at the time. So we were presidency, right? And they were governed by a governor, who was the governor, chief of the Leeward Islands group, but he was resident in Antigua.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then what I found in my research now is that basically then that governor had deputy governors in the different presidencies, as we just call them.
Right.
And that, that person was basically kind of, the local authority figure, so as it were. Because then again, we were saying there weren't any elected councils.
Right.
And that the plant also at the time in 1774 started asking, saying, we have some issues and we need some representation. Yeah. So that's how it came about. Yeah. So our first council, we're saying, came about from 1774.
Correct.
And that in 1950, which we'll get to, that was kind of a reinstatement of that elected system. Just to make sure that's clear, because a lot of times too, again, we thought that we were just getting an elected council for the first time in 1950, but there was actually some level of government in the territory before that. So that's important. So you had a couple things. Again, in terms of like doing the research, it was kind of interesting to find out, different things. Like I think it was in. Like before the 1774, there was a Captain John Walton that had proposed to the British government to have a system of administration to encourage the development of the islands and then to curtail the smuggling and other lawless behavior, right. Which was there a lot. But you can't really expect much different from pirates, but there it is. And seeing actually he saw the Virgin Islands as a separate colony from the Leeward Islands and used Barbados as an example for that. But, as you were saying, based on our size, our profitability or value wasn't seen as there. So the first lieutenant governor was called John Pickering, and he was a wealthy planter and Quaker. Right. And under his leadership, actually, what I found in my notes is that we had moved the seat of government from Spanish Town to Fat Hawks Bay. That was also a surprise to me that it was in the east. Because, again, we just think it's always been Rotown.
Right.
So there we have it. Rotown was actually the third location for the capital for the Virgin Islands. It was actually in Fat Hawks Bay before.
Yes.
But he resigned a year later because of his religious beliefs. Yeah, so he wasn't allowed to.
He wasn't into this war and fighting and stuff like that. So he had to give it up. And funny enough, when he gave it up, one of his worst nightmares came true because this other European, John Hunt. And he was not a Quaker, and he was an enemy of the Quakers, as they put it in the research. And he apparently became, a governor at some point. And he apparently also was the husband of Mary Hunt, who she believed in Quakerism, and she became a Quaker. And of course, he didn't want her to, be involved in that and all of that. And so he used to try to stop her from going to the meetings.
Okay.
And eventually, God took her out of her suffering. And I think he expired at some point. And sometime after, she married Samuel Nottingham.
Okay.
So then she became Mary Nottingham.
Okay.
And of course, hopefully, I should say, those names are familiar with the community because they're the ones who freed the enslaved persons that belong to them, which are the Nottingham Free People, which is now a big part of the cultural tourism product in Longlook area. And I'm part of that, also that project and that organization. And we are trying to really also document that particular story. We call it the Nottingham story. And, have it out there, have it available so that persons can know, the history behind that and how it came about. Because in the Western Hemisphere, it's believed to be the first free black community in the Western Hemisphere. And this was, you're talking 1776 when this happened.
Yes, several years before emancipation.
Before actual emancipation, right, in 1834. But in the document that I spoke to earlier with the ministerial system, we do have a list of all those persons who were lieutenant governors. So you are correct in that in 1741 it was John Pickering, and then you had some like John Purcell. I think one of his brothers also was a lieutenant governor. You had Hunt, and quite a few others were lieutenant governors before they actually got their legislature in 1774, and then they sent down the Chief Justice. His name has gone from me now, but he didn't last very long because he just couldn't. I mean, they still kind of more or less just did what they wanted.
Yeah.
And so
they were studying the judge.
Yes, George Suckling, yeah. And so he has a very interesting book about that experience.
Okay. Oh, he wrote a memoir?
Yeah, he wrote a book about that experience, George Suckling.
And I think one of the key things, too, to also point out here was that the court was important as it related to land matters.
That's correct.
Because, persons, again, everybody was just showing up and claiming claiming property.
Yeah.
In some cases, it was granted by the government. In other cases, person was just taking possession of land, and it was causing a lot of confusion. So that was one of the key things in terms of it was for an elected council as well as a court, so that they could have a judge to rule on these different matters.
Right.
So in my paper, I had identified that the assembly is what they refer to it as, was actually, where was it? 12 appointed members, as well as 11 elected members. So it was modeled after the UK Westminster system, where they have like the House of Lords and the House of Commons, where the House of Lords are appointed, the House of Commons. And I was surprised at that as well because, I didn't realize it was such a sophisticated system.
Yeah. Because now we make it sound as if this is a new thing.
Yeah.
We are just now into this thing. But from way back then, and especially since it was modeled on the Westminster system, they have had houses of assembly and, the nominated members and then the elected members, which was a legislative council.
And one of the things for me while we are talking about it and just coming to mind is that imagine if that had continued, how more mature our political systems would have been, because it was set up in such a way from so early on. But we'll touch on why it disappeared.
Very important.
So they had that. So they had the two levels of government basically. So they had the appointments and those that were elected, and elected. I think it was the elected assembly. There were 8 members from Tortola, 2 from Borgengada, and 1 from Just Van Dyke. So again, these conversations are around separate representation for the outer islands.
Right.
They weren't even on talk then, they were the actuality. And I think in one of the iterations, there was actually a representative for Anegada. Once persons started to reside there, and that was part of it. Okay, so over the years, for the most part, now sugarcane production was the main export product out of here. And of course, now they would have been importing more labor as it relates to slaves to be able to do these different things. So as the population continued to increase, things started to become diverse and set up. So elections were held every 3 years, and there was a requirement. Well, there was a requirement initially for living in the constituency, and then eventually that was abolished. So that person's had, I guess, some level of flexibility in terms of where they at. So we're going into, let's see where my notes are. Okay, I guess we're starting to approach getting closer to Emancipation era. I have in 1831, there was a granting of full rights to blacks as British subjects, and freed blacks were allowed to run for office once they owned property. All right. Why was that such a big deal?
Well, I was reading an article by Gussie McClellan Todman, and he really laid it out really nicely. Because if you look at the composition of the legislature, the earlier legislature, that 1774 one and subsequent ones, they were really qualifications in terms of you had to own land and you had to, land or house or whatever, but you must have property. And, they were really trying to, as was implied, keep out enslaved persons or the free blacks, even though they were free colored or whatever. They didn't really care too much of them being able to make any decisions in the islands. And so they had these property income qualifications to be able to run, and a literacy qualification to be able to vote. Yeah. And so, it kind of kept them out. And so and really and truly, that's one of the reasons that eventually we lost the legislature was pulled away, because after you said in 1831, and they started very grudgingly giving rights to free colors and so on and so forth. It was not very popular at all. They didn't like it. Okay. And so they tried to find ways and means of ensuring that didn't happen. They did not think that we were capable of, representing ourselves, of self-determination, as we now call it. And so,
okay. Yeah. So it was the assembly actually became biracial in 1837 when W.A. O'Neill and A.C. Hale Smith were elected from Virgin Gorda and Just Van Dyke constituencies, respectively. All right. I actually got that out of the one of the legislative anniversaries. That was one of the papers that I had.
Yeah, that's William Agrippa O'Neill. He is related to the late Honorable Ralph T. O'Neill.
Okay. William Agrippa. And A.C. Smith, A.C. Hill Smith, does he have family relations still here?
That would be, the Smiths. Probably he's related to you, Shayna. Abraham A.C. Hill, Abraham Chalwell Hill Smith.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you have, you can see where some of the names are still here. Chalwell Hill Smith. I think at some point he moved on to St. John. Yes, but he still had that relationship with the Virgin Islands. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So things kind of started to go downhill from here, apparently.
Yeah.
When there were elections, the president is what now they were calling the deputy governor or the lieutenant governor, was constantly dissolving the council because he didn't think well of the candidates, and obviously it was because of their race.
Right.
And then eventually there was a single chamber legislature of 10 persons that was put in place in August 1854 that replaced now the council and the assembly. And this was 1 year after the Tortola riot, actually. So this was
1853.
I think that was the cattle tax.
The cattle tax
riot.
Correct.
All right, so we'll take a quick pause there. I don't know how many people know about that. Just a quick synopsis of what happened in 1853 around this cattle tax.
Well, again, they imposed a tax on cattle. And who owned cattle? Who owned, the livestock and so on, were the growing freed persons and the colored persons and so on. What we call a laboring class in the countries and the countryside, the villages and so on. They were the ones who owned. After they left, after 1834, and you had the actual emancipation. And of course, there's a debate now that they weren't actually freed until 1838.
Yeah.
But yes, they were freed because they weren't slaves anymore. But the point is, though, they were locked into a system where they were still dependent on the estates, and so they had this arrangement to go and work on the estates, but at least they were getting wages, or sometimes there was this crop sharing, which again, they were always disadvantaged because sometimes probably they didn't even get what they should have gotten, their fair share. And so the newly freed population, they had all the skills. I mean, from being in the slave economy, being in the slave system, they were the ones working the land. They were the ones who were doing this, with the skills and so on. So it was kind of not too difficult to transition into the economy. Okay, so 1834, everybody has left.
Yeah.
And left us here to fend for ourselves. And so what they were thinking that we would all, disappear. Well, apparently not, because Virgin Islanders, we are very resilient people. So, and but at that time, the economic downturn had kind of really set in, and so the government of the day wanted to have monies in the coffers, in the budget, in the treasury, to address, the social infrastructure, health services, maybe education, and so on and so forth. And they tax the laboring class. Now, the irony about that too is that...
So you're saying then basically is the people who didn't have cattle came up with this idea.
That's correct. Because they were not feeling it, it
doesn't matter to
matter.
Yeah. Because it was probably, I think it went from 25 cents to 50 cents a head. And for some people, they might think that's a little bit. But I mean, to go from basically that's 100% increase.
Yes, definitely.
That's a problem. So whether it was $1,000 to $2,000, that's 100% increase. And in those times, like we're describing, these are people that are just coming out of slavery. So this might have been just that next generation.
Yeah.
It would have just been one generation away from having been in slavery, and they're trying to build a life as it were, and build for their families. So so they went and put this tax in place, and I think everybody showed up the next day in town.
The irony was that it was due around the same time when they celebrated Emancipation. I mean, what a slap in the face. And so the peasants, peasantry, the laboring class, the persons turned up from the estates out in Anderson Estate, Paragon, Joes Hill, King Garden Bay, and so on. And they came into town to the Treasury, which is where the old post office was there, across from the plaza. From the plaza, Salvador's Plaza. And if they were supposed to pay $1, they gave the treasurer, Mr. Bryan, $1.
Okay.
And he said, no, I'm not taking that. It's supposed to be $2, right? So they said, well, we don't have that kind of money. I said, well, when you get it, then you can come back and pay it. And so he refused to take it. And they were highly offended. And, first of all, because, just like that, you dropped this tax on us. There was no kind of, nothing. Just like that, we thought we have to pay, no warning, anything. And so from what I read in the research, because we have access to the Danish West Indies papers.
Okay.
Because we didn't have newspapers at the time here in the Virgin Islands. And there was a statement that was a little pushing and shoving there in the office. And they got upset and so on with Mr. Bryan because, he practically threw them out of his office. And then so they went and they canvassed the troops.
Okay.
And they told the other folks, okay, we are coming back for you, and so on and so forth. And it's just like when you had a 1949 march, everybody kind of rallied together, rallied around the persons. And the next day, they marched into town and say maybe 1,000, over 1,000 something persons. And the riot started from there. And of course, they did for one or two other disturbances in earlier years, they ran to St. Thomas to try to get assistance.
Yeah.
And they were so angry, they practically burned the town down. And the properties of some of who they thought were the offenders, the administration, the government officials, and so on, who they saw as the enemy. And so it was again the Methodist missionaries who sort of, I think the Anglican priests as well, who sort of spoke to them and kind of calmed them down a bit and so on. But a lot of damage was done in terms of because of the anger and how they were treated. Okay, so I don't have the money now. I want to pay. Well, at least just take this $1 and then I will come back with the rest. And the guy said, no, he's not taking anything. When you get the rest of it, come back. But of course, the guys knew I can't get the rest of it, so let me just take. Maybe
and you work
when I work or whatever. And he didn't want that, and so that offended him greatly. But that was a turning point in really standing up for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of went downhill from there, and things just got worse. It was, as we would say now, put on top of put, and to the point where eventually the 1949 match came up, right? Which was a really critical turning point in our political development in moving forward. But in between that, because of all those situations where they thought, well, the unruly laboring class, unruly population, they can't probably read nor write. We can't leave them here and let them become a government. And so, and even with the government that was there, a lot of them had started to leave. The estates were not becoming profitable anymore, and so there was a lot of absenteeism.
Yeah.
And so the governor and so on, the Leeward Islands Federation and so on, they just pulled the rug from under them, and they dissolved the Legislative Council in 1901, and that was it. We didn't have representation, but the question is, we had Legislative Council, but who are they representing? Their own interests. Were they really interested in representing the populace, the majority of the population? So that was also an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was really interesting because, again, people were looking for, better quality of life. Because, again, this is not too far from coming out of slavery.
Correct.
And what the treatment would have been. So, of course, parents would have been telling their children about these things. So if there was still that kind of, discrimination that would have existed, just a couple of years before, and apparently it was still evident in terms of the attitude towards the population by the officials. So, it was really interesting to read. I was like, what?
Yeah.
We want no joke.
Yeah. So it's research like that we are trying to pull. We have a lot of the documents now, like I said, where it's not available, we are trying to find, and we found a lot of that information in the same Danish West Indies papers, and research and so online from databases in the United Kingdom and so on and so forth, and we are trying to put it together. And you and I have talked about the fact that I'm looking for what I call trying to get research fellowships for persons out there who might be interested in doing some research on these issues, doing some oral history interviews, so that we can really document and really have our history and our political development or economic developments, and they go hand in hand, really. Yeah. Have it down pat and have it documented for posterity, for others who coming up, the current set of students and so on, both at secondary and tertiary level. Yeah. To when they're doing their dissertations and so on, to have this information readily available. So, we do have a work cut out. But the Institute itself has a lot of promise. I mean, there's so much that can be done. Yeah. And so we are just, we have had, the Institute has been, I think, in existence since somewhere in the early 2004, maybe somewhere around there. Okay. And we have to credit Mrs. Wheatley, Jenny Wheatley, with being a part of that process at the time. And, it has taken off, and we have been building upon it. Doctors, both Smith, Angel, and then Catherine, they have been directors. They both have moved on, and so I was transferred to that institute. My background, part of my background having been information science and research and so on and so forth. So I'm there, and I'm trying to just take it forward, continue to take it forward. It will be an incremental steps
to build
because,
on it.
Okay. There's resources we need so many things, but we'll use what we have to get there. Eventually we'll get there.
And it's so key because that's one of the things that inspired me to do the My Virgin Islands story project as it relates to getting this information out now to the wider public.
Correct.
Because again, we tend to talk about our history and our heritage around events or on occasions. And it's something that we need to be doing, I think, consistently.
Yes.
Until it becomes like general knowledge. That you can stop a 10-year-old and ask them, who was the first lieutenant governor of the Virgin Islands? And they should know. Yeah. Because again, these are things where or history is more important to me than the modern day facts, because these are things that are around us and we experience, so it's easier for the recall. But those things that have defined us as a people, in terms of how again did we get here, we didn't just show up.
That's right.
There's been a journey, there's been a fight that as we learning that it didn't come easy.
That's right.
That it was something that we had to challenge the system for in some cases. So here it was now that they took away the legislature as it was. I think at that point too, all they had was just a nominated council that would supposedly advise the president at the time. Yeah. So things went forward. So as we were saying earlier, after emancipation, main industry was agriculture, because again that's what the free persons would know as it relate to primarily sugarcane, but of course now we had to eat, so we have to grow everything else, and that I find that was something that even went all the way back to our ancestors in Africa. Yes. Because again that was what they did for I should say a living. That's what they knew. They were agriculturists. Yes. So coming over to the Caribbean, they transferred those skills and they used them to the best of their ability in terms of what they knew. Because even the boat building, those are things that came over with them from Africa, because they had to build their own transportation.
That's correct.
Yeah. So it wasn't anything they taught them on the plantation.
Not at all. Not at all. And then these islands again being surrounded by water, they really had to, even those who probably couldn't build a boat, I mean, they had to learn really fast.
Adapt.
That was really a major means of transportation of getting. So we had livestock farming, we had crop, farming and so on. But the fishing and the boat building was also a big part of it. And with the Virgin Islands Studies too, we have the Maritime Museum, which is in the Marine Center area on South Campus, as we call it. And that's also under the Virgin Islands Studies Institute now. Okay. And that also chronicles or documents the history of that particular industry, boat building. And we have biographies of persons who were boat builders and captains and so on. And really and truly, I mean, those guys were really, really skilled. They didn't need sometimes a compass or whatever. They could tell, the depth of the ocean. They could tell, what kind of voyage was going to be based on the moon and these really, celestial signs and all of that. I mean, they were really skillful. I remember reading one time an article by someone about, he was my great uncle, Edward Frett of Palmtown area. He was a very well-known boat captain. And he used to sail a boat for J.R. O'Neill. And he was somewhere in Antigua in the Leeward Islands area, picking up goods and so on. And a hurricane was threatening, right? And he hadn't reached back home yet. And they said Mr. J.R. was out there on the pier pacing. He's
worried.
Back and forth. And he's, and then finally, wow. Then he looked, and there was the boat. Came around the corner, and and she came in, and he was so relieved. And then he shook Mr. Frett's hand and said, "I had faith in you. I never lose hope, because you always brought your vessel home." Because he knew that persons like Mr. Frett, Edward Frett, and so many others, and there are a lot of them in Eastern and Western and Walton. I think your relative Smith, Joshua, one of them, his sons, his father, whatever, they were also popular boat builders. But so I always remember that story about Edward, when she saw the boat come around the corner. She lost her, the sail or something in the wind and all of that, because he did have to come through part of the storm. Yeah. So she was like limping coming home. But the point is, she came home. Yeah. And so he shook his hand, said, "Welcome home. I was expecting you. Always bring your vessel home." Yeah. And those guys are really, really skillful.
Yeah, and the same dangers that existed now, were then. And again, they had less technology. Yeah. Less what we would call training and education.
Exactly.
But, those guys were on point. They never missed a thing. If you just tuned in, you've actually missed a good chunk of our discussion. I am your host, Shana Smith, and you're listening to the Vigilate Dialogues. And with me, I have Miss Bernadine Louis, from the Virgin Islands Studies Institute at the Lavity Stoutt Community College. And we're going through our political journey. So we're post-emancipation. We just lost our legislative council. Where are we? We're coming down now around the 1870s. In 1872, we became a presidency of the Federation, and the president was nominated by the governor.
Correct.
Frederick Augustus Pickering. This is another important name we should know. He was the first colored Virgin Islander to act as president from 1884 to 1887. And talk about dual, well, not even dual, he was multifunctional. So the president in those days they acted as a magistrate and the treasurer to save on government expenses. And then coming on down later on, 1889, the president was changed to commissioner. So that's a title most people probably know that we refer to the governor as. But again, the social conditions were not very good, and there was still a lot of civil unrest during these times. 1887, 1819, civil uprisings were quashed by assistance of troops from St. Thomas and Antigua. So that's to tell you how really unruly we became. The later one caused by customs officers seizing a long-look vessel found smuggling. Tell us that story there.
Yes, that would be the famous Mr. Christopher Fleming, John Christopher Fleming. His father was also John Fleming. But he was regarded almost like a mayor of Longlook. He was looked up to and so on. And, they always say persons from Longlook, they don't take nonsense. They stand up for their rights and, they support each other. And so, again, he was into shipping, into boat, a captain. And in those days, like we were just talking about captains and so on, and a lot of persons turned over their goods, and so to these captains, they believe in them, had faith in them, that they would safely take their stuff to St. Thomas and so on, and wherever they were trading, and buy what they needed, whether it was hardware, stuff, supplies, nails, or whatever, and bring them back. And so when he came back from St. Thomas, he was stopped in the customs in Rotown, and he decided to make an example out of him. The then commissioner, I think it was Chad, and they decided to make an example out of him, and they seized the boat. The boat was, it was first of all called the Fair Knot, but I think persons know it subsequently as the Village Bell.
Okay.
And so they seized the boat, and of course they tried to talk them out of it and said, persons in the community are waiting on these supplies, and so give us we are willing to pay the fine and whatever. But they weren't listening. Almost like the 1853 riot. Right? They're not listening.
Similar attitude.
Yeah. And so they went back to the village, Longlook, and they told everyone there what happened. And oh boy, again, those persons rallied around each other. He and about 12 of them or so on, and they marched over, because at that time you didn't really have roads and so on, right? You just had
so they would have sailed tongue if anything.
And they marched over the Bellevue Hills and they came down into Rotown. And so the commissioner heard that these guys were coming, and again he got scared and he hightailed it for St. Thomas again to look for help. And they came into the same, Alva Georgia Square looked like it was
that was
the hot spot.
Point of action.
Yeah, point of action. And they assembled there, and I think it was said that one of them had a pistol and fired it in the air, and so they thought that, there's gunshot, and these guys are rebellious, and they came to take over, threatening the person. And so after the whole thing kind of dissipated, they arrested them, though, and they sent them to Antigua for trial.
Okay.
And again, in a paper that we found in the Danish West Indies newspaper, 1890, 1891, they were sentenced. He was sentenced to like 6 months, I think, in prison. He and another one, and you had Gordon, the Gordons, one of their sons, he was with them. You had St. Thomas or Toma, it was called at the time. So 2 or 3 of them got 6 months, John Fleming being one. A couple of them got 4 months. And one of them, a Todman, that seems to be an unlikely name for Long Loop, but there was a Todman there. He didn't get sentenced. He was the only one that escaped. But they went to prison, yeah, and when he came back, though, he came back to a hero's welcome because what he did and what he stood up for, the persons thought that was really anything. And so they took care of his family while he was away in prison, no doubt, and he came back to a hero's welcome. So he's regarded as a local hero in the community. Yeah. You know, because he stood up for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, is the unknown people or the people we least expect is who I am coming across as, you know, these were the national heroes that, challenge the status quo and the system when necessary to make sure that, you know, people weren't being taken advantage of. Because social justice isn't just a thing now. This is something that has always had to exist in terms of people really fighting for that. So I think that's a good place where we're going to stick a pin in this until the next episode. We're going to need them wanting more. But, you know, again, we're trying to, you know, help persons understand, you know, what was the situation on the ground? How were things really happening around those times after emancipation? That it wasn't the best of times, but it definitely was critical in shaping, again, our society and how we got there. I mean, the commissioner now, to show how powerful this person was, they also acted as a medical officer, the postmaster, magistrate, the treasurer, and a whole bunch of other public official posts to supposedly save on expenses. But of course, there would have been a conflict of interest with some of these things. But you know, they're out here and their boss is in Antigua, so you know, it's kind of like we're doing whatever that they wanted to do. Essentially. So, you know, that we would have a problem with. And even with the executive council that was supposed to be persons that would advise him, they were having a difficult time holding those meetings. One of the stories that I found was where they talked about it was at risk of being dissolved because of two other popular members, Joseph B. Romney and Frederick A. Pickering, were there, and J.B. Romney resigned in 1901 due to a difference between the members and the commissioner. And but I think he had convinced somebody to sign back up. But you know, there was a proposition that was made by the federal council in Antigua to appoint a federal officer to serve on that local council or abolish it altogether. So this is where now we came to that place of, you know, according to the research, that in 1901, the Constitution was surrendered, and then the Federal Council in Antigua actually abolished the local council in 1902. And then, so therefore, now the governor in the Leeward Islands was the only representative. You know, so now we were completely without representation, both locally and on the Federal Council. And I think that's such a key thing because it's similar to, let's say, for example, even though we have a local council now, it's like we're being governed by the UK, but we don't have representation in the UK Parliament, you know. And it does make a difference. I mean, for some people, they're thinking it doesn't make a difference, but these are the people that are making decisions that affect your life.
That's right.
You know, they can get up tomorrow morning and decide, hey, no more Constitution.
That's right.
You know, because of the structure that we have. So we have to be paying very keen attention, again, knowing what happened in the past so that we don't repeat.
Exactly.
And knowing how we're going to proceed into the future. So we're going to pick it up at that point in our next episode. As far as it relates to now, you know, we're without elected officials. And this was about 125 years since we actually had gotten a council and had some type of elected leadership from back in 1774. So that was quite some time to have lost that. And that's why I said, you know, imagine if that had continued without that period of disruption, you know, where our political maturity would have been. But, you know, we're gonna talk some more about that because again, we're seeing where we're not in a good place socially, economically, or politically.
Yeah, we were considered what they call a backwater.
Yes.
Undeveloped backward place.
Yeah. So we're outposts of the UK.
Couldn't manage ourselves, can't rule ourselves, and so they just took away our legislative council, or you know, rights to self-determination, as the buzzword is today. So
we're going to talk some more next time also too in terms of going into political heroes and looking at women in politics and our constitution and again what that document means to us has meant to us, I should say, over the years, right? So we pick up from there.
Okay.
All right, so public service announcement for today. Yield at the roundabout. I see some of us are trying our best to navigate those waters. But just reminding us, when you're coming around the roundabout, you really have to yield to persons on the roundabout to help make for a smooth transition. And, be mindful of the person on your right or your left so that we could get home unscathed. Life hack. I received a great email last week with 10 anti-inflammatory drinks to boost your wellness. I tried out a couple of them. One was blueberry and banana, and they had turmeric and ginger in it. Really good. So these are things, again, to help maintain our health. We've been talking about that a few episodes back as it relates to not just now in terms of the pandemic, but, ongoing. We want to check out our health. So I'm going to have that information on the Facebook page, Vigilate Dialogues. And the source of it is called downshiftology.com. That's the name of the site, right? Word of encouragement this week: be on guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, and do everything with love. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 13 to 14. I've been pulling words of wisdom from the Bible these days because, I find you can't get any better than this. But so be on guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, and do everything with love. All right. So again, if you just tuned in, you missed an awesome storytelling today. We were talking about a political journey. You can tune back in tomorrow, Sunday at 9 a.m. And we're coming soon on Facebook and YouTube. So as soon as that is ready to go, I will be sure to announce that. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I'm your host, Shayna Smith, saying let's continue the change in conversation for a better Virgin Islands.
Hands, sing BVI, wave them to the sky, rock from side to side, represent the Virgin Islands. Hands,